In this episode, we move into a topic that often sounds more complicated than it really is when you first hear the term, because enterprise architecture, EA, can seem like something reserved for senior planners, diagrams full of boxes and arrows, or long strategy documents nobody outside leadership ever reads. For the Certified Information Systems Auditor, CISA, learner, though, this subject becomes much easier once you understand that EA is really about how an organization structures its business processes, data, applications, and technology so they work together in a deliberate and sustainable way. It is the big-picture design of how the enterprise uses IT to support its goals. Without that design, systems tend to grow in disconnected ways, teams solve problems in isolation, and the organization slowly becomes more expensive, harder to secure, and more difficult to manage. What makes this so important in Domain 2 is that management of IT depends on seeing beyond one tool or one project and understanding how everything fits together across the whole enterprise. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our Course Companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good starting point is to define what enterprise architecture is in plain language. It is a structured way of describing how the organization operates, what information it relies on, which applications support that work, and what underlying technology makes those applications run. In other words, it is not just about servers or software. It includes the business side, the information side, the systems side, and the infrastructure side, all viewed as parts of one connected environment. For a beginner, one helpful analogy is to picture a city rather than a single building. A single building can be designed well, but the city still needs roads, utilities, zoning, transportation, and planning so that thousands of separate structures can function together. EA plays a similar role inside an organization. It helps make sure that different systems and processes do not grow in ways that conflict, duplicate effort, or create confusion about how the enterprise is supposed to operate. One reason EA matters so much is that organizations rarely build their environments all at once from a perfect plan. Most enterprises grow over time, often through new projects, urgent purchases, mergers, vendor relationships, changing regulations, and business expansion into new products or regions. That means the technology environment often becomes a mixture of old and new systems, overlapping applications, changing data flows, and local workarounds created to solve immediate needs. Without some architectural view, those decisions pile up until the enterprise becomes difficult to understand and even harder to control. Costs rise, integration becomes messy, users complain about repeated data entry, security teams struggle to see where sensitive information is moving, and leaders find it hard to tell which platforms are truly critical. EA matters because it helps the organization step back from that drift and make more deliberate choices about what should stay, what should change, and how the environment should evolve over time. A beginner should also understand that EA is usually discussed through a few broad layers, even if organizations name them differently. There is the business layer, which describes the organization's processes, capabilities, services, and goals. There is the data layer, which focuses on what information the enterprise uses, where it comes from, who owns it, how it moves, and why it matters. There is the application layer, which covers the software systems that support business work. Finally, there is the technology layer, which includes the platforms, networks, devices, hosting environments, and supporting components that keep everything running. These layers are useful because they show that technology decisions are not supposed to begin and end with infrastructure. If the organization changes how it serves customers, launches a new product, or expands into a new location, those business changes can affect data, applications, and infrastructure all at once. EA helps leaders understand those relationships before decisions create unintended consequences. One of the most valuable things EA provides is alignment between the business and IT. A common weakness in organizations is that technical teams work very hard on systems and projects, yet the connection between that work and business priorities becomes blurry over time. One group may modernize a platform because it is old, another may buy a tool because it looks efficient, and a third may create a new application because it solves a local problem, but nobody is asking whether the combined result supports the enterprise in a consistent way. EA helps answer that question by connecting technology choices to business capabilities and long-term direction. It asks whether a new system fits the enterprise model, whether it duplicates something already in place, whether it introduces data problems, and whether it supports future goals rather than only present convenience. Auditors care about this because poor alignment often leads to waste, control inconsistency, and systems that look useful in isolation but create complexity and risk for the organization as a whole. Another key idea is standardization, which is one of the main practical benefits of EA. Standardization does not mean forcing every part of the organization to operate in exactly the same way no matter what. It means using common approaches where it makes sense so the enterprise can reduce unnecessary variation, simplify support, lower cost, and improve control. For example, if 10 departments all choose different tools for similar functions without coordination, the organization may end up paying more, training more, integrating more, and protecting more than necessary. At the same time, EA should not become so rigid that it blocks legitimate business needs or prevents innovation. The challenge is to find the balance between consistency and flexibility. That balance is an important management consideration because some degree of local difference may be justified, but uncontrolled variation usually leads to duplicate data, fragmented reporting, inconsistent security, and greater difficulty when the organization tries to monitor or audit the environment. EA is also deeply tied to the idea of current state and future state. The current state is the environment as it exists today, with all of its strengths, weaknesses, dependencies, and limitations. The future state is the target design the organization wants to move toward over time in order to support strategy, improve efficiency, reduce risk, or enable growth. Between those two lies a transition path, which is the practical sequence of changes needed to move the enterprise from where it is to where it wants to be. This matters because organizations often make the mistake of discussing transformation in vague terms without understanding how complex the starting point really is. A future state vision may sound exciting, but if it ignores legacy systems, staffing constraints, data quality issues, or critical business dependencies, it becomes unrealistic. EA helps make change more manageable by describing both the existing environment and the intended destination clearly enough that management can make informed decisions about priorities, timing, funding, and risk. Integration is another major consideration because modern enterprises depend on systems sharing information across many boundaries. A customer order may begin in one application, affect inventory in another, trigger billing in a third, and be reported through a fourth. If those relationships are poorly understood, changes in one area can break processes elsewhere without much warning. EA helps the organization understand those links so integration is planned rather than accidental. That is important not only for efficiency, but also for control and reliability. Poor integration can produce inconsistent records, duplicate transactions, delayed processing, and unclear ownership when errors occur. For a new learner, this is a good reminder that a system is rarely important only because of what it does on its own. It is often important because of how many other activities depend on it. Auditors look closely at integration points because they are common places for control gaps, reconciliation problems, and misunderstandings about where data came from or who is accountable for its accuracy. Security and risk considerations are woven throughout, even when the main discussion sounds strategic. The way an enterprise is designed affects who can access information, how easily systems can be monitored, where sensitive data resides, how resilient services are, and how quickly issues can be contained or corrected. A fragmented architecture with too many isolated tools, inconsistent interfaces, and unclear ownership tends to make security harder because every exception adds complexity. By contrast, a well-managed architecture can support clearer data flows, more consistent control design, easier monitoring, and better visibility into critical dependencies. This does not mean EA eliminates risk. It means EA gives the organization a stronger foundation for understanding where risk lives and how design choices influence that risk over time. Auditors view this as important because architecture is not just about efficiency or modernization. It shapes the control environment in very practical ways, especially when organizations rely on shared platforms, third parties, or large collections of connected business applications. Data is one of the areas where EA becomes especially meaningful because enterprises often struggle not from a lack of information, but from having too much scattered information in too many places. Different applications may store similar customer details, employee records, transaction data, or operational metrics, yet they may define those records differently or update them at different times. That creates confusion about which version is correct and whether leadership can trust reports built from multiple systems. EA encourages the organization to think carefully about data ownership, flow, consistency, classification, retention, and usage across the enterprise rather than only inside individual applications. For audit purposes, this is important because controls over data are much harder to evaluate when nobody can clearly explain where data originates, how it changes, which systems depend on it, and who is responsible for its quality. A thoughtful architectural view helps reduce those blind spots and supports stronger governance over the information that the business depends on every day. Legacy systems and technical debt are also important considerations in enterprise architecture. Many organizations continue running older platforms because those systems still support critical business processes, contain valuable historical data, or connect to other processes that would be difficult to replace quickly. The problem is that older systems often become harder to support, harder to secure, and harder to integrate with newer services over time. Technical debt builds when the organization keeps choosing the faster short-term solution while postponing deeper improvement, and eventually those postponed decisions become an architectural burden. EA helps management recognize when the environment is becoming too fragile, too expensive, or too complex to sustain without more deliberate redesign. For a beginner, this is a useful way to see that not every old system is automatically bad and not every new system is automatically good. The real question is whether the architecture still supports business goals, control needs, resilience, and long-term manageability in a way that is realistic for the enterprise. Another major consideration is governance, because EA is not valuable if it exists only as a diagram or planning document with no influence over real decisions. Governance gives architecture meaning by making sure projects, investments, exceptions, and changes are evaluated against agreed principles and enterprise direction. If business units can introduce major systems without any architectural review, the organization may slowly lose consistency even if an architecture program technically exists. On the other hand, governance should not become so heavy that it blocks every project with delay and paperwork. A mature approach uses architecture as a guide for decision-making, not as a barrier to getting anything done. This is especially relevant for CISA because audit thinking often focuses on whether management has established a framework that supports consistent choices. EA becomes powerful when it helps leaders say yes to the right solutions, challenge poor fits, manage exceptions transparently, and connect project activity to the broader goals and control needs of the enterprise. A common misconception is that EA is mostly about drawing technical models or using complex planning language that ordinary staff can safely ignore. In reality, the most useful architecture work often makes the environment simpler to understand, not harder. It helps explain why some systems should be consolidated, why certain data should have clearer ownership, why a shared platform may be better than several isolated ones, or why a planned exception should be reviewed carefully before it becomes permanent. For auditors, EA is not judged by how impressive the diagram looks. It is judged by whether the organization has enough architectural understanding to make sound decisions about change, integration, control, risk, and long-term sustainability. That means the important questions are practical ones. Does management understand the dependencies among critical systems? Does the organization know where duplication exists? Is the future direction clear enough to guide investment? Those are the kinds of considerations that turn architecture from an abstract concept into a meaningful part of IT management. The core idea should be much clearer. Enterprise architecture is the big picture design that helps an organization understand how its business processes, data, applications, and technology fit together across the enterprise. It matters because without that view, systems tend to grow in disconnected ways that increase cost, weaken control, and make change harder to manage. Strong EA supports alignment with business strategy, better standardization, clearer integration, more informed risk decisions, and a more realistic path from the current environment to a better future state. It also gives auditors and managers a stronger basis for evaluating whether the enterprise is being shaped intentionally or simply drifting through a series of local decisions. For the CISA learner, that is the real value of this topic. It teaches you to see beyond one system at a time and evaluate whether the whole environment is being designed and managed in a way that supports the business with clarity, control, and long-term purpose.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.